Once you've thought through your final design and thinking about what parts will be white and what parts will be black, then you're ready to start getting your linoleum block. So that's what this is called, it's a block. And then you'll put your final design onto the block using a pen or pencil to create that design so you know what to carve. If you're a little bit worried about drawing straight onto the linoleum block, you could grab a piece of tracing paper, design your design on here, erase, kind of change things up as you need, and then grab a ballpoint pen. So for this part, you can line up your design here. So I drew the linoleum block and then did my design inside. And then using a ballpoint pen, you can press down on your lines in your design. You might kind of have to rip through the paper. But when I peel it back, you can start to see that pen shows up just a little bit. Then I can make those lines a lot darker, so I know exactly that is where I want that ice cream cone to go. So just going through and adding in some designs here onto the linoleum block, either using transfer paper, tracing paper, or just drawing straight onto it with a pen. Now my design's all transferred onto my linoleum block, but I still have my sketch out just so I can keep looking and know, like, okay, this part I want to be black, so I don't want to carve that part out. My background is white, I want to carve that part out. So keep your sketch with you so you can always look and see what you'll be carving in case you get confused. So now we have a couple more tools in the mix. We've got our linoleum block, we have something called a bench hook. So this literally hooks onto the edge of the table. You can see that it's right against because there's a little hook down there. And this is where I'll place my linoleum block right along the other edge. So this prevents me from my block from moving around while I'm carving it. And it's a safety measure too, so you don't accidentally poke a finger or cut yourself. This is our linoleum cutter. You'll notice on the end it has a sharp blade. These blades are interchangeable. There's lots of different sizes, so I'll show you how to do that in a little bit here. Notice, if you look at the blade itself, it's in the shape of a V. Now, because it's in that V shape, it was really a painful cut if you accidentally cut your finger, because it will cut in that V shape. So be very careful. Whenever you're using the linoleum cutter, your hand is always behind the blade, always. So watch while you cut your linoleum block to make sure you're being safe with that tool. So I'm going to start carving my linoleum block here. I'm going to start with my background first. So different size blades. So this one's a little bit bigger. So in those bigger spaces like backgrounds or maybe a really large object in your design, you might want to use that larger size blade to cut into your linoleum. So as I am cutting here, I'm just pressing, holding it like this. So this back part is in kind of the base of my palm, and my fingers go over the top like this. My hands are holding my block back here, and I'm just pushing gently to cut that linoleum. It's pretty easy to cut through, so you shouldn't have to use a whole lot of pressure to be able to cut that. You might be noticing that little pieces of linoleum are coming off of my print, and I'm making a pile of them so I can throw them away later. It's easy to kind of create a really big mess with all of these pieces you're cutting off. So just make sure to save them in a pile, then you can toss them at the end. So you can see I'm just kind of pushing through. I'm not cutting super deep. The linoleum itself is probably 1/4 inch thick, and you don't have to cut all the way through. Just kind of creating that top layer and cutting that part away. So I'm carving. Anything that I carve will be white because the paper is white. Anything that I don't carve will be black because that's the color ink we're using. So I'm just going through and doing that. You can kind of see that there's some in-between spaces that I'm not carving. And we looked at some prints that have a little bit of that left over, and it kind of creates an interesting kind of pattern or texture around your print. So you might want to do that. So now I'm just going to go through and continue to carve away the parts that I don't want. Now in my ice cream cone, I really only want these lines the inside lines to be the ones that are going to be carved away. So this blade is probably a little bit too thick for that. So we have some really small detailed blades. This one's really tiny. So I'm going to switch it out. So to do that, I'm holding this part here turns, turning this and holding this at the same time. Not holding it by the blade, but down here, this part is not sharp. So turning, and I'm able to pull this part out. Then you'll see here, there's kind of movable parts. There's this central piece here, and a tiny little piece on the edge. So I'm just putting my blade in between those two pieces, pushing all the way down, but not super far down, in just enough, and then turning this to tighten it so this part stays secure and won't move on me. So now I have a lot smaller blade that I can use to get some of those detailed lines in my print. Yeah, way smaller. So then go through. You can of course turn your block if you need to get at it from a different direction. That is sometimes super helpful to do. And then I'm carving away everything that I want to be white in my print. So everything I'm carving will be white. Something else I want to point out too, when you have some objects in your print and you're maybe carving away your background, something I'd recommend is just going through, kind of outlining that shape. This will help to make sure that it's really easy to see what your shape is. So just go through and outline any of those details you really are just carving around, rather than just carving around it. Make sure you outline it. That way it'll stand out really nice when you go to print. And especially when I'm using this smaller blade, I might notice like right down in here I didn't carve very deep. So I just want to maybe go through again, take my time to go around those curves and make those cuts just a little bit deeper. And notice right there I was carving kind of sideways, so I took my time, I turned that block and made sure I was safely carving the opposite direction. So I'm not carving towards myself ever or off to the side, just in case. Sometimes these are easy to slip and you might get someone next to you with your blade, so just be very careful. So I'm just going to outline these objects here and then continue to carve away my background. And then I'll be ready to print once everything is all carved out. Once you finish carving out all your details on your linoleum block, then you're ready to start to print. So here's a few more tools you'll need. You'll need a brayer. This is what we'll apply the ink with. You'll need some ink and a rolling tray. You'll for sure want to get some paper before you start to print. And this cardboard box top here is to help make sure that when you go to print, that your linoleum block will always land in the center rather than super sideways or a little bit diagonal. It'll make sure that it's nice and straight for you. So first step, grab your brayer, and I'll bring some ink over to your table, and you'll want to take that ink, not all of it, but some of it, and start to roll it out in a square. So if I take all of it, it'll dry out really quickly. And I just want to make a small square space like this. If I spread it out all over my entire tray, the ink is going to be more likely to dry out really fast, and I won't be able to give you any more ink if you do that. So make sure you're taking care of your ink, using your materials appropriately. So I'm just kind of spreading it out, and it should look like the texture of an orange peel on here and on your brayer. So you can kind of start to see that actually up close there. Looks a little bit like an orange peel texture. Once you've got that texture, and you don't need a lot of ink to create it, then you're going to use your brayer to roll that ink onto your block. And notice I'm rolling up and lifting up. And if you need a little more ink, you can get some more. But I don't need to roll it a whole bunch of times, just a few, and then I'm ready to print. When you go to set down your brayer, make sure it's always on the metal part, because if it lays flat on its roller, the edge that it's against the table on will start to flatten over time. So take care of your materials. Just make sure that it's resting kind of upside down like that. All right, so I'm going to take my print here and put it in that block. So this is helping keep my print nice and straight. Be careful if you get ink on your fingers when you go to grab a nice clean piece of paper. Part of your grade will be craftsmanship and how well and how clean your prints are. If you get thumbprints all over, you'll lose some points for that. So, I've got my paper, and I'm just going to line it up with the corner of my box and press it all the way down onto my print. And now I'm going to put one hand in the center of my print and use the other hand to press my paper right onto that ink on my block. So while I'm doing this, I'm transferring the ink from the block to the paper. It's really easy to forget corners or edges, so make sure you really go over those spots carefully. You will want to press down every part, every space on your block so that ink will transfer just right. Takes a little bit of time. Sometimes you can hold your hand in the center and kind of peek to see if it's working out okay. But once you feel like you've gotten enough pressed down all over your block, you can lift that print straight up like that, and now you have a print. So a couple things to notice here. You can see this ice cream scoop is nice and dark, so that means I got enough ink there and it printed just how I wanted it to. Now this one up here, you can see there's some white speckles, which I didn't want to show through, so I probably should have pressed a little bit harder, or burnished. That's what it's called when you're pressing, transferring that ink. Should have burnished a little more on that spot. So I'll keep that in mind when I go to do another print. So once you've printed once, all you have to do is just maybe add some more ink to your pile here if you need it. Just roll right on top of your block again. So you don't need to wash this off in between prints during one day. But if you're done for the day and won't be printing the rest of class, you'll for sure want to wash it. So adding more ink there. And it should look like the texture of the orange peel on the surface of your block too. So, looks pretty good. Maybe missing a spot here. And once you feel you have enough ink, then go ahead and print again. So for this project, I want to see at least 4 prints. They should all be pretty good, meaning there's not a whole lot of white space, no fingerprints, all of those things. So I'm just going to go through and do a few more prints, holding my hand in the center, burnishing, and doing those steps. Here's a couple last steps for your project here. So let's say you went to go ahead and print your first time, and you noticed that you had some lines in the background like this one. And let's say maybe you didn't really like how that looks. Something you could do, now that I've printed, you can really see what parts are black that are going to stand out in print. So if I wanted to change my print or kind of edit some details, I could go ahead, wash this off in the sink with just some water and soap, dry it off, and then go through and carve back any details I didn't like. So you can still use some carving tools even after you've printed. Sometimes you learn what shows up and what doesn't at that point, so it can be kind of a helpful tool. So I'm done printing for the day, so I'll for sure want to wash this in the sink next. But one last step. So we have 4 prints here, and that's how many you'll be turning in for this project. So they don't have to all look the same. We have different colors of ink and different colors of paper. So if yours are a little bit different, that's okay. It's kind of fun to try out different things. So last step is to kind of title and sign your prints. So the first thing you're going to do is put a title. So mine will be ice cream. And then I'll go on the other side here and I'll do my signature. You can do your first and last name or whatever kind of signature you would like. Then in the middle, of that title and signature, I'm going to put a number. So I have 1 out of 4. So each time I'm going to title, sign, and put then 2 out of 4. This one I would do 3 out of 4 and 4 out of 4. That's because we created a series of prints, which many printmakers do when they make multiples of something. They will number their prints so they have an idea of how many they made for that project. So you'll have to have those labels, and especially in that order. It's really important. So title, number, and signature. Doesn't matter which one's 1, which one's 2 or 3, it doesn't matter. Now, but if I were you, notice these last 2 aren't my best ones. These 2 are probably my best ones because my ice cream cones are really dark. I don't have any white spots really. And I made sure it was in the center, and I don't have any fingerprints or smudges or ink around the outside edge of my print. So this is a really good one. This one we looked at a little bit before, noticing how there's some white spots. I didn't press down hard enough. That's important to notice too. So if I were you, I would probably want to try 2 more prints, and these would be my first 2 that are good ones. So keep that in mind too when you're printing. You can make more than just the 4, of course. Last step is take a photo of your prints all together, somewhat in this layout. Take a picture and then upload it to your portfolio so then I can go ahead and grade your prints for this project.